Hello and welcome to this new lesson, which is one of the most important lessons in this course. In this lesson, we will talk about functions. A function is a block of code which only runs when it's called. It is used to perform certain actions, and they are important for reusing code, like define the code once and use it many times. To use the function, you need to call it inside your code. When calling a function, you may send some data or some input and it could return back an output for you. The most common function is the main function, which is the entry point that we have been writing since the beginning of this course. Now, our main function is basically this. We write it like that: void main, two parentheses, and two curly braces. Now, this is the function name, and main is reserved for the main function, which is the entry point. Between the two parentheses, we add the input. Now, if we don't want to add any input, we add the word void. Now, this is the returning data type. If this function does not return anything, then we call it void. We add void in the return data type. And the code that you want to execute or reuse, you usually write it inside here. This is the code. Now, this is one of the functions that we have been using a lot since the beginning of our program. To execute the function, you will need to call it. The function provides you with the advantage that it is defined one time and can be executed many times, so it takes the same size in the memory, whatever how many times it will be called. When you call a function, you can send to it some inputs, as we already mentioned. And the other example for a function that we have been using since the beginning of our coding process is the printf function. Now, printf function is basically a function that takes input between the two parentheses, and the execution of this function will print output on CMD, which is the command line window. Now, the print function takes a string as an input argument and print it on the screen. Any C project composed of one function or more, which are basically the main, print, and scanf. Now, printf, scanf, main, all of these are called C programming functions or built-in functions, because we do not create these functions, we only use them, we call them by their name. But if you created a function, let's say that you call the function Ashraf, then this is called a user defined function. So anything that you create is called a user defined function. Anything that you use and it's already created by C compiler or C programming language is called a built-in function or a C programming function. Now, to make things more clear, we need to talk about what should you do if you want to create your own function. Well, if you want to create your own function, you need to understand that a function consists of three parts, and you need to memorize these parts. The first part is the prototype. And this prototype declares the function. So it tells the compiler that there is a function with this name and these specifications. Usually, the prototype includes the return type, as we already mentioned, the function name, two parentheses here and there, and the input between the two parentheses, then the line ends with a semicolon. This is called a prototype. Now, this is the first part. The second part is called the implementation, and it's basically the place where you write the function code. It defines the function behavior, and it has the very same shape as the prototype, as you can see, except for these semicolon. Here we don't have semicolon. Instead we have the two curly braces. Inside them we will write the function code. And you can see that here. Here we have the first curly brace, here we have the second, and between them we usually write our function statement or code. Now, this is the second part, which is basically writing down the function itself with the code that we need to execute. Now, the third part is the function call. The function call includes the function name and any inputs between the two parentheses. And if it returns something, we need to store the data that this function returns inside a variable. Now, if it does not return anything, we don't need to store anything. Let's do a quick revision. A function that you create consists of three things that you need to write down. The first thing is the prototype, which is basically a way to declare the function. It's a line that ends with a semicolon, and it includes the return type, if any, the function name that you define, and two parentheses with an input between them, if there is any. Now, if there is no input, you need to write void, and we will cover this in a separated lesson, the meaning of a void data type. Now, after writing the prototype, we need to write the implementation, which is the function body. We use the same line as in the prototype, but instead of ending the line with a semicolon, we end it with two curly braces, this one and this one. Between the two curly braces, we write the function code. The third step is the function call. Inside our main, we can call our function with its name. So function name, and we send two inputs. Now I know that things might not be clear, so let's take an example to make things even more clear. Now, this is a function that we defined, and we are going to execute in few seconds. The first part here is called prototype. This is a line. This is the return type. This function will return an integer. This, the subword, is the function name, which is the second part of the prototype, as we already mentioned. Now we have two parentheses, as you can see here and here, and these two parentheses will end with a semicolon. Now this function will take two inputs. Now it can take more than two inputs depending on our program and our code, but you need to make sure that you have a semicolon between each of these inputs, and you have the type and the name for each of these inputs. So we have the data type for the first input integer, and the name is x, a comma, then the data type of the second input is integer, and its name is y. And the second thing, now this is the first thing that we have, it's called the prototype, as we already mentioned. Now the second thing is the implementation. This is number 2. And as we already mentioned, the first line is the same. It's a common thing between the prototype and the implementation, except for the semicolon. We have to remove it. And after that, we add two curly braces, and between them we will add our code. Now this is the code that you can reuse, and this is the function name, this is the return data type, and these are the two inputs. This function will subtract x minus y. So we'll create a new variable inside the function, it will equal x minus y. So the result will be inside z. And since this function returns an integer, we need to return the summation value. And we end the line by a semicolon. So this is our code. This block is called implementation, which is the second thing that you must do. This is the first thing. Now the third thing is the function call. Now, as you can see, the function call is simply calling the function with its name. Here we have the function name, we have the two parentheses and the semicolon. But instead of adding int x, int y, we are adding two values to be passed to the function, and you need to add the semicolon. Now, can you pass variables? Yes, you can replace these with x and y, or a and b, or whatever you want, but you need to make sure that there are only two inputs, since the function takes only two inputs, and you need to make sure that the variables are integers and have values. Now, once you send the values to this function, you can call it, which is the third thing. We call this a call or function call. Function call. Now, the function call is basically calling the function code. So it will give 5 and 2 instead of x and y. And 5 will be here, 2 will be here. 5 minus 2 equals 3. So z will equal 3. And it will return 3. Now, when you call the function, it will return an integer. So we need to create an integer variable. We called it var, to store the value that will be returned by the function. And in this case, it will be 3. So var will equal 3. And when we print this, it will print result is 3. This will be the output in our console window. And here we call the function, as you can see in this line, inside the main function. You can call it again and again and again without having to write the whole function each time you call it. You just write it once and you can call it, let's say 10 times, 20 times, whatever you want. Now, to make things even more clear, let's implement this exercise in our Notepad++. Now, to do this, we will start with the usual thing. We will include the stdio.h. Now, the first thing that we need to do is add the void main void, which is our main function. Now, what we will do next is simple. We will add the function prototype. Usually the prototype is written above the main. So here, function prototype. So the function will return an integer and its name will be sub. It will take two inputs, int x, int y, and we will end it with a semicolon. Now the second step, this is the first step. The second step is writing the function itself underneath the main, outside the main and underneath it, as you can see, or below it. We are outside the main. Here, write 2, implementation. Now what you need to do is simply copy the whole line here from the prototype, paste it here, remove the semicolon as we already mentioned, add two curly braces. Now you need to make sure that this is identical to this, except for the semicolon. You have to remove it. Now this function will subtract x minus y. A simple C code, and whenever a function returns something, it must contain the word return. It will return this value, z. Now, let's go to the last step, the call. So let's say we want to call this function, give it 5 and 2, Now, if we did this and we executed the code, nothing will happen. This function will subtract 5 minus 3. It will minus 2, sorry, it will equal 3, and the 3 value will be floating in the memory. So in order to control or to save the result from this function, we need to store it inside a variable. Let's call it var, and it must be the same data type as the return data type here, 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 and here. So it returns integer, so we need to receive the returned value inside an integer. Now, once we have the returned value from the function, this is the function call, the third step, by its name, we can print it out using a printf statement. Result equal %d, and here we need to add the var. That's it. Let's save the code. Let's call it functions, function test. Now let's compile it. GCC c a.exe. As you can see, result equal 3. Now we can play a little bit with this code. You can pass variables instead of constants. Let's say that we want to ask the user to enter 2 values. So enter first number, and we will take it with a scanf statement. %d, let's call it and first num. Now let me define 2 variables. Integer first number equals 0, integer second number equals 0. Now this is the second number variable that we want to store the second value inside, and let's call it second. So here is the first number, here is the second number. Now we will call the function, and instead of adding the 2 constants, we will add the first number and the second number that the user entered. Then we will print out the result. Let's add /n here, another /n here, and another /n here. Now let's call this again, compile it. As you can see, enter first number, let's say 10. Enter second number, let's say 4. The result equals 6. As you can see, it was implemented without any issues. So a function call can take constants and can take variables as long as these variables are of the same type as the implementation and the prototype. Always make sure that you are using the same type or the same data type, or else you might end up with syntax or logical errors. This is how easy it is to create a function, a user-defined function. As you can see, this is the first step, function prototype, the return data type, the function name, and the 2 inputs, end it with a semicolon. The second step is the implementation, which is the function itself. This is above the main, and this is under or below the main. The same as the prototype, but instead of semicolon, you need to add 2 curly braces and add your code inside it. The last step is the function call, which is basically calling, just like calling someone, calling a function by its name, passing the 2 inputs, and getting the result that it will return, storing the result inside the int var, which is the variable that we want to store the results in. That's it for the functions lesson. If you have any questions, please ask in the Q&A board. I'll be more than happy to help. Thanks for watching. This is Ashraf from Educational Engineering Team.